Hi, my name is Carolyn Berry. I am the Senior Partner Success and Marketing Specialist here at Jenzabar. I work with our partners and the Senior Manager of Partnerships here at Jenzabar. And our goal with these webinars is to introduce to you who our partners are, what they can do for your institutions, and how they've even helped some of our institutions already. I am very happy to introduce Coursedog, who became a partner officially this year. They were also a platinum sponsor at JAM 2025. We hope to see them back in 2026. This webinar is meant to introduce you to Coursedog, to work on making sure that you understand what we can do here at Jenzabar, not just with the Jenzabar products, but with the partner ecosystem to really improve your institution and the lifestyles and the management of student life. With that, I will turn it over to our partner Coursedog. We have Nick Janetta. He is the Senior Director of Solutions Engineering, as well as Bridget on their marketing team. And I will go ahead and pass it over to you guys.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks for that great introduction. Hi, everyone. We're so happy that you're here today. We have a great presentation put together, so hopefully everyone is settled in, grabbed a water, some snacks. It's going to be a great time, but let's go ahead and kick things off and begin with some introductions. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran, and I'm our Senior Content Manager here at Coursedog. So really focused on thinking about all things academic operations. I've been with Coursedog for about 4 years now, so I've had a chance to work with a lot of our partners, really understand kind of their pain points, their goals, their aspirations. So really excited to share some of those stories with all of you today. And I'll pass it over to Nick now.
Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, so I'm the Senior Director of our Solutions Engineering here at Coursedog. And what that really means is I'm really trying to help facilitate the conversations between the technology and all the problems that you all have. Obviously today we'll talk about academic operations in that regard, but I've been working in the higher education technology space for the majority of my career and very familiar with a lot of the challenges that you have and some of the opportunities we have to solve them. So excited to dive in today. Hand it back to you, Bridget.
Great, thanks, Nick. Well, before we get too far into things, I want to make sure that we can just go through a quick overview of today's session. So we'll start off by walking through some of the pain points that we've historically seen in the academic operations space. So we'll share some of the themes that we hear from our partners who we work with, as well as some data from a number of surveys that we've run that kind of give us some more insight into how both administrators and students perceive academic operations. From there, we're then going to focus a bit on, what does it actually look like to shift into some of those more streamlined and modern academic operations? And in particular, we'll take a look at some of the core functions that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, such as scheduling and managing curriculum changes. After that, we're going to transition into some best practices to actually ease into that transition of, rolling out a new process, rolling out a new piece of technology for your academic operations functions. I know that, transitions are certainly never easy. So we're hoping to share some practices when it comes to, what does it mean to be prepared for a successful implementation? How do you roll out some of those changes? And then how do you address those concerns on campus? And then finally, we're going to examine what success looks like. So we'll share some examples from our partner institutions and also kind of talk through, what success looks like in a number of different instances. And of course, we'll leave plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. If you do have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, feel free to drop those into the little box with the question mark, and we'll definitely make sure that we get to those at the end. And we'll also have a few polls throughout today's presentation. We always love getting everyone's perspective, hear what you're working on, what you're thinking about. So definitely be on the lookout for those. And then one last thing that I always like to address, I know we always get questions of, will the recording be shared afterwards? Yes, it will. So if you want to go ahead and reference this presentation later on, you will have that for your reference. Okay, well, that's all of the housekeeping on our end. So let's go ahead and get into things. As I just mentioned when running through the agenda, we're going to start off by talking through, what are some of the current challenges in academic operations? So we'll share insights from, some of the folks who we work with, and then kind of talk through, challenges that they've seen throughout their time working in academic operations. So I'm sure maybe a few folks are thinking, what exactly do we mean by academic operations? I think that it can be a little ambiguous. I know that it definitely probably depends on how your institution is organized, kind of, who is owning particular functions. But here at Coursedog, at a high level, we really like to think about it as academic operations encompassing all of those functions that really go into delivering the academic experience. So that is quite broad. I think, unsurprisingly, that really does encompass quite a lot. But to really help folks make sense of this, we actually have a definition up here from ACRO. So they published a book last year on the subject of academic operations, and they really defined it as all of these functions that you see listed out here on the screen. So curriculum management, syllabi, the catalog, scheduling, accreditation, all of that good stuff. But I think what's really more interesting about how they defined academic operations is they noted that critically academic operations, isn't just important for running an institution, but it's also really important when we're thinking about learner success, persistence, and completion. So with all of that in mind, there's a lot that goes into academic operations, and historically, it really hasn't been easy to manage everything that's going on the back end. I'm sure all of you have probably experienced, the pain of working in multiple platforms just to get one task done. So, you're navigating between emails, spreadsheets, online folders, probably a number of different tools. I'm sure you all could probably keep the list going for me. And that this isn't just frustrating and inefficient, but can also really lead to some of those errors. So thinking about manually typing in data on multiple locations, leading to potential errors, maybe things go missing. And then eventually, when you're navigating between these different places, it can be really difficult to know, what's right, what isn't right, what's the actual source of truth here. Aside from accuracy, I think working across multiple locations can also make it challenging to have transparency. So for example, we're thinking about a new curriculum proposal form. Perhaps it might live, in one person's inbox, or maybe it's in an online folder, but the access is restricted, or God forbid the person has left the institution and, and now no one can access it. So it's really difficult to know, what stage is that curriculum proposal actually in? And then also thinking about the scheduling side, right? So department schedulers, they're all out there building their own schedules, doing what's best for their department. Totally makes sense, but it's really difficult for them to know what's going on across the institution. When are other departments scheduling their courses? What potential conflicts are out there that would be good to know about in advance. So these are a couple of the themes that we hear from our partners, folks we work with across the industry. But I know one of the questions that I always find myself asking is, what does kind of the data tell us about practically what this looks like? So over the past couple of years, we've partnered with a number of different organizations ranging from, ACRO, University Business, College Pulse, to really find out what this means for both administrators and students. So we're going to share a little bit more about that on these next couple of slides here. So a couple of interesting data points here from a few of these surveys that I just mentioned. I think that overwhelmingly folks agree that academic operations do impact students. In fact, 9 in 10 of the folks who we surveyed agreed with this. And I think that this can manifest in a number of different ways, definitely dependent institution by institution. But some of the more common ways that we see students potentially being impacted is, both in their ability to access curriculum information and then get into the courses they need. So for example, are students able to access that current and accurate information about curricular offerings? And this second stat here was personally super interesting to me. So 54% of institutions surveyed by ACRO said that they don't have an approved catalog before students who will be part of that catalog are being recruited or admitted. And I think aside from, making sure that the catalog is published in a timely manner, we're also thinking about, are there errors in the catalog, or perhaps, are the policies the ones that are most up to date? Does it reflect, the new language that you recently approved this year? And then on the scheduling side, we found that half of surveyed administrators cited students' inability to get into courses as, a top academic operations barrier for them. And personally, I think scheduling is probably one of the clearest examples of how students are impacted by academic operations. So I would love to get into that a little bit more now, think about the student perspective and how this is impacting all of them. So the data that you'll see on this slide is from a survey that we conducted with College Pulse, and they're a great organization. Definitely recommend checking them out. But they basically have this huge bank of students who they work with across the country, and they surveyed 1,500 students across the U.S., across a wide variety of different institution types. And the survey really focused on those primary student-facing functions of academic operations. So like we were just talking about, the course schedule and catalog kind of being two of those main components that students might be touching the most often. The results here, I think, were pretty eye-opening. So starting on the left of the slide, you'll see 1 in 4 students said that they have found it difficult to understand degree requirements. And, I think that this can probably be for a number of different reasons. So perhaps the catalog is difficult to navigate. There's a PDF that's hundreds and hundreds of pages. They're maybe control F'ing their way through it, hoping for the best, trying to see if they can find what they need. Or perhaps it's maybe just there's an overwhelming number of courses and programs to choose from, and not having program maps makes it really difficult to actually wade through the number of options that are available. Okay, so then moving on next to kind of the actual process of getting into those classes that they need. I think that this is a pretty pervasive challenge. I think probably all of us can think back to our time in college and remember kind of the mad dash that happens when registration opens, trying to get into the classes that you need. So I think it's pretty telling here that 60% of students surveyed reported that, they did actually struggle to get into classes that they needed to meet requirements. And I think this is concerning for a number of reasons. Of course, we think about, on-time completion, staying on track for your program. But it can also put students, at risk for actually remaining at the institution. So you'll see here that in a worst case scenario, 1 in 3 students surveyed said that they would consider leaving their institution if they weren't able to enroll in the classes that they need. So I think all this data really ties back to ACRO's thesis from the earlier slide that proficient academic operations really does contribute to learner success, while on the other hand, those poorly managed processes can hinder student outcomes. And we know that this is probably one of the driving forces why many of you are here today, why you're thinking about academic operations. So I'd love to kick off with our first poll now and kind of learn more about why are you here today? Why is your institution looking to modernize academic operations? So let's go ahead and launch the poll now, and we'll keep it open for, probably about 60 seconds or so. So would love for everyone to participate here and kind of see what the responses are. Okay, it looks like we're having some responses come in here, which is great. It looks like we've got about 2/3 of folks who've participated. So if we want to try to get a few more responses in, and then we'll share out with everyone. Okay, wonderful. So I'm sure that folks here probably selected more than one of these answer choices, right? I think a lot of them are pretty intertwined with each other, but top one, reducing manual work and saving time. I think that's no surprise. That's going to be the biggest impact on kind of our day-to-day life, right? Our day-to-day coming into the office and actually getting this work done. But of course, when you look at the longer term picture, then all of that starts trickling down into promoting better outcomes, maximizing those resources, all that good stuff. But Nick, curious, do you have any thoughts here? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. Once again, looking at this, I'm not surprised to see that the vast majority want to reduce work and save time. I think that makes sense. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but really solving those tactical pieces, those tend to be the first big rocks we want to move. And then also not surprised to see some of the others really where we want to try to optimize, resource outcomes and really just try to do what's best for the organization and the students. So fairly, as I say, fairly equal responses outside of, really wanting to do the main blocking and tackling out of the gate. Great. So let's go ahead and move along here. We've heard from all you, and we want to walk through some of the key areas where we see the most opportunity for innovation in academic operations. In particular, we'll focus on scheduling, how we can meet student course demand, and better ways to manage the curricular change process. So where can we move the needle? Y'all just shared with us why you're here today and thinking about academic operations. What do these changes we'll be talking through look like particularly though? From a day-to-day basis, it means more efficient work. So back to the survey poll. Less time is spent on manual data entry, going back and forth over email, and trying to hunt down information. And speaking of hunting down information, this also means simplified data access. Getting everyone on the same platform means no longer having to pull reports for others. We all know how that goes. There's a million spreadsheets, you can't find it. Obviously, we want to reduce that. And similarly, centralizing everything in one place also alleviates the pain of struggling to find all the changes and keep track of them. Once again, it's just it's an n squared versioning problem that I think we've all tackled probably more than just in our work life, but maybe personal lives as well too. Is the more that we can centralize, the better off we typically are. Well, this is all wonderful. The truly meaningful changes happen over time as you are doing the essential work of building course schedules, reviewing curriculum changes, and making strategic decisions. Increased transparency and better access to data means schedules that are better aligned with student needs and have fewer conflicts. The course schedule also heavily impacts how effectively resources are leveraged. For example, courses scheduled during non-standard meeting pattern times can lead to overlapping times and inefficient space usage. And finally, how effective is the curriculum that we are offering? Creating a thorough and timely curriculum review process means that changes are reviewed and approved expeditiously to ensure that programs and courses are keeping up with student demand and employer needs. I think we're seeing that even more so now with the rapid rate of change. I personally have not spoken to a single institution where that has not been the case. So definitely an emphasis there. And these are all great goals. So let's look at how we can practically move forward with them. Great. So first, let's focus on academic scheduling, putting students' needs first. So we kind of talked about that student success component. Traditionally, each academic unit created their own schedule. So English does theirs, math has theirs, biology, etc., art, and they all have their own needs and wants, and there's a uniqueness to each of them. And then they send them to the registrar's office to be compiled and entered into the SIS, right? In your case, Jenzabar. However, this came with challenges. First, departments often had little insight of what courses were being offered across other departments. So, for example, as we're looking at like general education courses, those are oftentimes shared and need to be scheduled and room utilization, etc. But this lack of transparency creates conflicts and sections packed during the few hours of prime time. And we all know students, they want they want to teach at certain times, whether that's right in the middle of the day or after work, et cetera. And we see those peaks, so we need to be able to accommodate for them. Additionally, faculty preferences and availability need to be factored in. With little information about how the course schedule was or was not serving student needs, the schedule remained largely the same and was more likely to cater to faculty needs. In fact, a survey that ACRO conducted on course scheduling practices found that the schedule from the previous term, faculty availability, and faculty preferences were the top 3 factors that influenced the creation of the course schedule. And finally, the decentralized nature of scheduling can make it challenging to enforce scheduling policies. So rules, policies, all those things that really go into the schedule. Maybe sometimes they're sticky notes, right? But those things can be like standard meeting patterns. We want to go from hour to hour rather than 9:15 to 10:15 and potentially use a room for 2 hours. So things like that. Or limits on the number of sections that could be scheduled during prime time would be another example. Or biology and art get these particular rooms because they have the room features that are needed for studio art or a lab component. So those are all important pieces, as you all well know, being in there in the day-to-day. And the registrar's office has to account for these factors and go back and forth with the departments to make the adjustments. So back to that decentralized nature really at play there. So how are institutions moving away from this manual approach to scheduling? Moving all of your scheduling into one centralized tool really is typically the first step. All departments create their own schedule in the same tool, eliminating the need to send spreadsheets back and forth or emails or sticky notes or whatever it is you're doing now. I think we've heard them all. This doesn't just make life easier for the registrar's office, but it also empowers department schedulers when they are building the schedule. Departments can now see what other departments are offering and be more intentional about when to schedule their sections and how to avoid conflicts. The registrar's office can also build rules into the platform, eliminating back and forth needed to fix errors after the fact. So we can be more accurate from the start and try to reduce some of those change management pieces, last minute changes that we all know. We know those impact students, right? Departments will be guided to only schedule courses during standard meeting patterns and instructed on how to follow other scheduling policies. This helps put students first by minimizing those conflicts and errors that impact them. These are all wonderful practices when you're actively creating the course schedule. But now I want to look at how we can be more proactive and meet student needs with the scheduling process. Great. So before we get into our next slide, I'd love to hear from you all again about how you're thinking about student course demand and the data you're consuming to make these determinations. As you can see, we went ahead and launched the poll. We'll leave it open for about 60 seconds or so. Great, I'm really excited to see this here. It looks like enrollment data is leading, assuming that's probably historic enrollment data, some degree audit data, student surveys, anecdotal. So we have one. I think we're fairly close to having 100% here.
All right, it looks like we've closed the poll and shared out the results with everyone. So hopefully everyone can see that okay. But like Nick mentioned, it looks like enrollment data leading the way here, which makes a ton of sense. And yeah, interesting to see kind of the spread that we have across these other few here.
Yeah, and we're seeing a couple are using degree audit data, student survey. It's really good to see a couple different ways here. Great. So let's talk about course demand. Given how laborious it is to create the course schedule, many institutions roll over the schedule from term to term. This makes sense that you don't want to start from scratch each term. But what are we losing when we roll the schedule over with little examination? Sorry. As one registrar I was talking to said, rolling over the schedule means rolling over your problems. Consulting forward-looking data courses is one way to assess how student course demand will look for future terms. For example, degree audit data can be a great way to more proactively assess what courses your students truly need and how many seats you need to offer. Degree audit data can show you what courses your students have already taken and which ones they will need to take. Pairing this with program maps shows which term a student is likely to take a course can give you a pretty good idea of real-time demand. And I was happy to see that I believe there were 7 there that were looking at the degree audit data, because it really does have a lot of that key information in there about the pathways and where the students have taken. So it's not just that enrollment data where we know where they've been, or almost even rolling over the problem to problem sometimes, but we can really look forward. So aside from degree audit data, data from previous scheduling terms like waitlists and overfilled sections can also give you an idea and give us a couple clues as to where student demand wasn't met and where students are experiencing bottlenecks trying to get into courses that they need. The end goal of more accurately predicting student demand is to ensure that you're offering the right number of sections to keep students on track and taking enough credits to finish on time. I think that's why we're all here, right? We want that student outcome, and we want that success metric at the end of the day. This also hopefully means less last-minute scheduling changes. We kind of talked about that, and scrambles to offer enough seats for high demand and foundational courses. Really flip it around and make sure that we're building the schedule out and we know which courses need to be taken. We had a lot of students take English 101. We know that from the degree audit data, and therefore next term, rather than rolling it over, we know for a fact that there's going to be a lot of students taking English 201 or whatever it is in that sequence. We'll really be able to look at that in a more qualitative or quantitative way. Great. So we want to take a look at curriculum management for a minute. So moving away from scheduling, we can touch on how we can more efficiently manage the curriculum approval process. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the curriculum approval process can be trying for a number of reasons. With curricular changes moving through forms, emails, spreadsheets, and more, the submitter of the original curricular change often doesn't know what stage the approval process is in. Curricular changes span months to years, often due to this lack of transparency and difficulty enforcing timelines and deadlines. So how do we solve these challenges? Moving to a workflow-based system. Moving to a central curriculum approval system that leverages workflows allows you to gather all information in one place and keep submissions on track. At a high level, your institution will map out your curriculum approval forms and the steps a submission will take as it moves through the approval process. Submitters log into one system and will be presented with a pre-built form that when they fill it out. This helps ensure that proposals will always be submitted with all of the necessary information. From there, the proposal will move through the predetermined set of steps where all relevant parties have access to the proposal at each stage. This isn't just great for keeping everything on track, but it also centralizes where curriculum changes are happening and finalized. Once a curriculum proposal is approved, that change is made in the same system. This guarantees that your curriculum repository is always accurate and you don't have to worry about errors from duplicate entry. If you have a curriculum system that is directly integrated with your catalog, this also allows you to push approved changes directly into the catalog, and then again, preventing that tedious and error-prone process of duplicative entry. mute. Bridget, I think you're mute.
Thanks, Nick. Great shout out there. No, that was great. Definitely a lot of helpful practices that you shared there. But as we all know, I think that it's one thing to say you're going to make the change, and then it's another thing to actually go ahead and successfully implement them. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, how can you actually make sure that your rollout is successful? We're going to go ahead and walk through some of those practices to make sure that you're really setting yourself up for a successful transition and also effectively preparing your campus community for some of the changes that might be coming their way. When I talk with our partners and ask them, how did you set yourself up for success when you're transitioning to this new system? They almost always bring up process mapping. Wow, it's a tongue twister there. So even if you already have a strong process in place, I think this is a great time to evaluate your process and see where there might be some opportunities to make adjustments. First off, can we identify any current gaps that there might be in the given process that you're looking at? So this could be a good time to look for where some of that, maybe redundant work exists, manual data entry, some of those error-prone activities that we've talked about in the past few slides. And then next, will you be collecting forms? So for example, thinking about the curriculum approval process that Nick was just talking about, how many different types of forms do you need? Are you going to need one for, new courses, new programs, editing courses, general education courses, all of that good stuff. And then once you've figured out what those forms look like, what types of workflows are we going to establish? Do we need just one workflow that everyone is going to follow through, or are there going to be maybe a couple of different ones because we know that different folks need to be involved? And then, of course, what exactly are those given steps? I think that there are a lot of folks at institutions who kind of have that historical knowledge and they're like, yep, it needs to go to these 5 people, but maybe other folks don't know that, or maybe it's being sent to those folks in the wrong order. So making sure that you're being really intentional about what that looks like. So for example, I've talked to some folks who said, hey, we had a great curriculum approval process, but we realized that we should probably be notifying our marketing team when a new program is added. So that way they can go ahead and start promoting it. Or, oh, we should probably be looping in the library to make sure that they actually have all the resources and materials, ready to go to support this new program that we're looking at. And then next, what type of information are we asking folks to provide? What information needs to be noted when a section is being scheduled or when a new course proposal is being submitted? What about an assessment plan? We know that there's certainly a lot of information that goes into that. And then finally, who needs to be consulted about these changes? So making sure that all of those relevant departments, leaders, committees, all of the folks who are regularly involved in these processes are being brought in. So once you've gone through all of that hard work of actually going through the implementation, it's now time to roll out that change to campus. And we know that that's never easy. So how can we go ahead and make sure that we're really setting ourselves up for success and preparing the campus community? I think unsurprisingly, many of our partners emphasize the importance of engaging stakeholders early on. So this doesn't just include the beginning of rollout, but going way, way back to, when you're even selecting a tool before you've even begun the implementation. I think this is really critical to get folks on board as early as possible. So mapping out, who's going to be impacted by this change and how can we make sure that they're in the room for these conversations. Of course, the group of stakeholders is probably going to look different depending on what function you're revamping, but this might include department chairs, coordinators, curriculum committees, schedulers, IT, registrars, we could probably go on and on here. And then once we've actually, gotten a little farther along in the process, how can we make sure that we're, including some of those stakeholders in our testing scenarios? And can we make sure that we're using practical ones? So using real scenarios, whether it's thinking about what does it actually look like to build a section, or what does it actually look like to review a curriculum proposal form, but making sure that really those practical examples are used to not only test out the process, make sure it's working well, but also help those users build confidence along the way so that when the new process actually does launch, you'll hopefully already have some champions who can kind of help bring the rest of the community along. When it comes to actually rolling out these changes, I think that it's also important to be thoughtful about how much work and how much change you're asking folks to take on at once. I think probably unsurprisingly, rolling out too many changes at once can be really overwhelming and reduce the likelihood of buy-in. So I've talked to some of our partners who are like, oh yeah, we're integrating 3 major systems right now and rolling them out at the same time, and folks are just exhausted. They do not have any more mental capacity to do another one on top of that. So I think it's important to really be intentional about this and think about the order of your rollout. Thinking about, what our business needs, what's important, what needs to get done first, and then how does that fit into the academic calendar and where everyone's at with their work cycle. Next, and this is probably one of my favorite ones, what is a high impact win that you can lead with to drive momentum? So is there one, specific task or pain point that, really drives folks crazy? They really hate having to use this certain form or send an email every time they need something done. So is this a challenge that you can solve early on and really show the benefit of moving to a new process or a new platform? And demonstrating these wins early on can really, help get folks excited for the coming change and help increase buy-in. And then finally, communication. I know this always seems like such a simple one, but it really does go a long way when done right. So providing folks with multiple opportunities to receive updates, to learn about what's going on, to ask questions. And I personally see that some of our most successful partners offer a multitude of different ways for folks to learn about what's going on. So many of them have, leveraged a knowledge library, recorded videos, synchronous trainings, drop-in office hours, you name it, and they're doing it to really help get folks as comfortable as they can with the new change that's coming. That being said, though, we know that change isn't always easy. Even with the most, well-executed plan, there's likely still probably going to be a handful of folks who might be concerned or even show some resistance. Pretty rare to see 100% of people on board immediately. So I think it's helpful to kind of get ahead of some of those concerns and address them up front, just to maybe help ease any fears that come with the transition. For example, you've probably had folks at your institution who've been there for, maybe decades. They're used to doing their job in a certain way, and thinking about a new change can be scary. Maybe they're concerned about what this means for their responsibilities, what it means for their day-to-day work. So being really intentional about, how we can communicate that change. And then, of course, I'm sure that probably you and many other folks have had experience with bad rollouts, bad technology implementations that have went sideways. Unfortunately, it is all too common. So it's a valid concern. And I think that it's really helpful to talk about, why is it going to be different this time? What have we learned about our previous mistakes? And how are we going to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And then, of course, like we talked about in the previous slide, consulting the relevant stakeholders so they can get a preview of what's coming and provide feedback in advance. And then, of course, addressing folks who are already stretched thin. How are they going to be impacted by this change? Hopefully, how can we demonstrate that this will actually save time for them for the future? And then finally, I think a similar point to what we talked about on the previous slide is showing that value. So of course, it's great if you can, solve a challenge immediately, but if not, can you maybe show some use cases from a peer institution who's made a similar change? What were their results? Kind of what positive things can we expect to come our way? So I think these are all really helpful considerations to think about, and definitely something that you want to incorporate into your communication strategy to really make sure that you're setting yourself up on the best foot forward here. Okay, so for our final section before we go ahead and get into Q&A, I want to spotlight some of the wins that come with undertaking this important work of how we revamp and overhaul our academic operations functions. And so I always love this slide. It highlights some of the amazing work done by our partners at Pomona College. They're part of the Claremont Colleges Consortium. I'm an alum there, so always heartwarming to see some of the great work that they're doing there. And, I think this slide is by no means comprehensive of all the work they've done, but it highlights some of the important wins that they've had on the scheduling and curriculum side. So on this first row here, you'll see that originally when, it came to scheduling, many of these processes were managed pretty manually and definitely came with a number of headaches. So for scheduling, room conflicts were unavoidable. This was done manually, lots of conflict about, well, I want this room, this person wants this room, and trying to figure out how you navigate all of those preferences. And so each term, they were experiencing 40 to 60 conflicts. So this means an average of 50 conflicts every single term that they had to identify, then reconcile, go back, and fix every single term. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this personally, but the back and forth communication to, really make these fixes is not insubstantial. There are multiple people, multiple emails going back and forth. So it really is quite a headache. But Pomona has seen a drastic reduction in this. So since transitioning to Coursedog, they only experienced one conflict in their recent scheduling term. Next, let's talk about some of the results that they've seen in their curriculum approval process. So in the past, it typically took them about 5 to 6 committee meetings to clear the proposal queue, and oftentimes those meetings went over time. And I'm sure probably some of you are part of these meetings. They're usually hours long. Nobody wants to be there for additional hours into the evening. And many of our partners tell us that one of the reasons why these meetings typically run overtime is because folks have never seen these proposals before. So they're reading them for the first time in these meetings and then responding to them. So rather than providing that feedback before their meeting, they're actually having to do that in real time, leading to these meetings going overtime. However, thanks to the new transparency that Pomona has gained with Coursedog, they've recently been able to clear their curriculum queue in just 4 of those meetings, and none of them went overtime, which is always great to see. And then finally here, proposal tracking. So we've, I think, talked about a number of times why this is such a nightmare. No one knows what stage a proposal is in. So you find that the curriculum committee, the registrar's office is having to track down these proposals and then spend time responding to these inquiries about where the proposal is at. And with this new transparent workflow tracking that Pomona is now leveraging, everyone can see this information. So the registrar's office is no longer spending time fielding these emails and having to respond to folks about every single proposal. So this is a great story, but I know that sometimes the results aren't always necessarily tangible. Many of our partners are quick to point out maybe some of the less quantifiable results as well that they experience from moving to a single integrated platform. And so first off, I think moving to a more modern system, of course, it's great from that work efficiency perspective. I think in that poll it came through that that's really important because it's one of the things that impacts us most on day to day. But it also, I think, provides us a moment to take a step back and actually evaluate how we've been doing things, oftentimes for years. So some of our partners tell us that this was really the push they needed to go ahead and review, their policies, their academic offerings. We often hear that folks realize, wow, we have hundreds of policies listed in our catalog. Some are policies, some are procedures. Maybe we have multiple policies covering one topic. So how can we go ahead and reduce those and make them, not only clear for students, but also for faculty and staff who have to navigate them as well. And then also moving to a new, curriculum review system is wonderful in that it can actually help you expedite some of those changes that faculty may have just been sitting on because they were like, you know what, it's too difficult to get this through. I'm just going to wait. So we've had partners say, yeah, within the first few months of launching Coursedog, we've received hundreds of new proposals, maybe for little things, but it was changes that faculty wanted to make and just figured it wasn't worth the trouble. But now all of a sudden they were able to approve those changes in just days instead of months. So next, more efficient governance. So streamline processes, again, great for limiting some of that manual tedious work. And I think that's great in terms of it makes hopefully the day-to-day less frustrating, less stressful. But hopefully that means it's giving you more time back to actually do some more of that substantive and strategic work. I was recently talking with a registrar and she was saying, of course, my goal is to make everything as easy as possible for students. I want them to be able to find everything online, be able to have those self-service interactions. But that being said, if a student does come into my office and they have, a more complex question, I want to actually have the time to be able to sit down with them and work through it. I don't want to be stuck behind my desk, just having to really get through everything. I want to be able to prioritize that student and make sure that they get what they need. And then the final point on this slide, a positive culture shift. So, I think working in higher ed, it can be stressful at times. A lot is being asked of us, and we're taking on big projects term after term. Publishing the schedule, publishing the catalog, it's no small feat each time, and staff are often pulling long hours, going row by row to input and review these changes. So I think to whatever extent we can reduce this manual work and hopefully create a less stressful environment, more collaborative environment, that's always a huge win. So with that being said, we are almost at Q&A. I want to pass it over to Nick, though, just to give a very brief overview of Q&A. And if you have any questions, feel free to start dropping those in the chat now.
Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, I'll take us home here through the last couple slides. So where I wanted to pick up is really where Coursedog is able to come in. So we've talked about all these processes that are out there today, whether it's an existing system or tool, maybe it's a spreadsheet or even those sticky notes I've referred to a couple times. Where Coursedog has come in is we have built an all-in-one academic operations platform. So that's taking all of the pieces that we've discussed here today. So whether it's curriculum, scheduling, assessment, and put it all into one tool with a similar look and feel, similar governance, similar user experience. I think really important for all those adoption pieces that Bridget touched on and the modernization. But more importantly is the interoperability between all the platforms. So if you kind of go back and you think, all right, our main goal here is to align a new program or courses with the outcomes so that our students can be successful in the world today. I think at the end of the day, that's probably a statement most of us can agree on. And the place that oftentimes that starts is either an assessment where we're coming back and we're looking at how a particular course is doing. So Coursedog has tools that can help with that. Or the curriculum side, how that leads into curriculum and that change management piece. So Coursedog's able to help with that, as we discussed, with efficient forms, approval processes, et cetera. But then what happens when that course is approved? Well, a lot of things, as we know. We want to be able to look at how it's doing. So there's an analytics platform. We want to be able to publish it to the catalog. Coursedog's able to help with that automatic publishing because we're sitting on top of the curriculum data. So the second a new course is approved, we can have it show up in the catalog. We can have it tied back to the student information system with we have one single integration with not only Jenzabar, but as you can see, all the other student information systems as well too. We can have it we can have it work together with the syllabus, and we can have that syllabus show up in the catalog. Now we need to schedule that new course. Well, because we're going back to the SIS, We can now easily create a section on top of that new course. We can look at the faculty workload component of it. We know when all the rooms are booked for the academic scheduling, so we can look at the event scheduling. And then lastly, I think, or maybe not even last, before we start scheduling, we're going to be looking at that course demand projections that's sitting on top of both the historic registration, so all those things we discussed with fill rates, enrollment, but also that degree audit data. That's really a key cornerstone component so we can look forward. So those are all ways in which our platform is working together to help solve that academic operations piece, once again, layered on top of a very simple, easy to use, modern user experience, central data model, single SIS integration, and then also that LMS component. I think that that's really important as you're looking at assessment and syllabus and those types of integrations as well too. Great. So that key piece where I imagine there might be some questions here, and why you're all here is, well, we have to be able to integrate. Absolutely, that's table stakes. We need to be able to get that data. So the SIS in general, it holds all of that information. It's really that centralized hub and spoke model. It has the courses, it has the programs, it has all the sections, rooms, terms, etc. We need all that information. So Coursedog's going to complement a lot of those pieces where we'll sit on top of that with a bi-directional real-time integration. And for example, let's say you're using our tools to make a scheduling change. Our tools will show you, we need to go use this combination of time room instructors so that we meet those student needs and demands and build out an efficient schedule that also meets the faculty, right? As you know, it can be a difficult piece. That's where Coursedog comes in. But at the end of the day, we hit save. It goes back to Jenzabar. And in Jenzabar, now you have that updated section, and the students are able to see it and register for it. And that integration really is the glue that makes that happen. We're working with all the flavors that are out there, whether that's EX, CX, One, less CX in the world today than there was maybe when we started this journey a couple of years ago. And it's a pre-built package, and we're more than willing to dive into the specs. I'm not going to get into the technical pieces today, just kind of given where we're at, but obviously more than willing to talk about that. And then also another piece that we really haven't talked about either, but I did mention that the integration really is a core component, table stakes for any platform that you're working with. So we do have a separate product team, engineering team that just focuses on the integration itself and builds a nice no-code maintenance dashboard that really helps not only set up but maintain that as well. Great. With that said, I believe we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we're opening it up to Q&A.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nick. Well, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and drop those in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we get to them. I'm seeing one question here from someone who's asking if we can share the results of the last poll. We'll make sure to follow up with you and get those results to you. We can absolutely do that. I believe too that hopefully that will also show up in the recording as well that we'll share out with folks at the end. I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so if anyone does have any questions, feel free to drop those in. We'll definitely stay on for a few more minutes. Oh, looks like we just got one that came in here. So this attendee is asking, does this work with the desk version of Jenzabar? Nick, I'll pass that over to you as our technical expert here.
Donna, when you're saying the desk version, do you know which version that is exactly? Is that CX?
So there is, hi, Carolyn again, popping back in. So there is a desktop version of Jenzabar 1. So I believe that is what Donna is referencing.
Great, J1. Yeah, and we have done integrations with Jenzabar 1. So yeah, that'd be something that we would want to have obviously more of a discussion as to how that's used. broadly across your campus.
And Donna, you can reach out to your Jenzabar account team, and they will also be able to investigate that for you deeper on the Jenzabar end of things.
Perfect. And we will also share our email addresses on the final slide too. So if you have any additional questions that, come up after this, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, well, hopefully we can close out a couple of minutes early. We have one final question here that we want to launch, just in case folks have any follow-up questions. That way we can make sure that we're able to reach out to you and get your questions answered. All right, well, as everyone is completing that final poll question, wow, thanks so much to Jenzabar, to Carolyn for hosting us on this webinar. This has been a really great discussion. I always love chatting with, the institutions out there. You all are doing great work, and just really exciting to learn more about what you're planning, what you're thinking about, kind of your goals. So I think we can go ahead and probably end a couple of minutes early. Hopefully you have a chance to take a breather before your next meeting. But thank you so much again, everyone. Our contact information is here, and we will definitely be sending out the recording afterwards as well, so everyone has that for their reference.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nick and Bridget. I really appreciate you coming and teaching us more about Coursedog and how it can help institutions. Thank you, everyone who has joined us today. And if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to Bridget or Nick, or you can reach out to your Jenzabar account team, and we can work on getting you connected with Coursedog as well. So thank you again so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.